Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to, cut through the noise and really get to the heart of what's going on. It's pretty wild how fast things can change globally, isn't it? One minute you're following the headlines, the next you realize there's so much more underneath. And right now, there's a situation developing incredibly quickly that, well, it demands a closer look. Today, we're diving into what is arguably the most significant turn yet in this really complex conflict involving Israel, Iran, and now very directly the United States, this whole triangle. It's seen a dramatic, almost fiery escalation recently. We want to help you sort through it. Our goal is basically to make sense of this surge of activity, pull out the really vital bits so you can feel properly informed, without drowning in news feeds.
That's exactly right. Our mission here is pretty clear. Untangle the sequence of events. How did we get here? Identify the main players, what they actually did, understand the immediate fallout, and crucially, graft the bigger picture. What does this all mean? We'll be digging through the latest reports, the analysis, pulling out those key pieces of information, the insights that matter, helping you connect the dots in a way that, let's face it, a quick scroll just can't.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about, getting you those essential insights from the sources we've looked at, helping you feel genuinely informed, maybe with a few surprising details, and hopefully keeping it engaging. So let's get right into it. This isn't just about the headlines, it's about understanding the deeper forces at work. Okay, so let's unpack this. June 21st, that date seems pivotal. What exactly happened then that just shifted everything into, well, a much more dangerous gear?
June 21st was, monumental, because that's when we saw direct, overt military action from the United States in this whole situation. President Trump announced that the U.S. had conducted airstrikes, and the targets: three major Iranian nuclear facilities, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. This wasn't like indirect support or proxy stuff. This was direct U.S. military intervention in a conflict that had mostly been, up till then, Iran versus Israel, often in the shadows. It was a very clear, unambiguous move.
Right. And these names, Fordo, Natanz, Isfahan, they pop up a lot for anyone following this. Why these specific sites? What makes them so important to Iran's nuclear ambitions?
Good question. Their selection wasn't random at all. Fordo, for example, it's built deep inside a mountain, heavily fortified, very hard to hit effectively. Natanz is, well, it's their main uranium enrichment plant, sort of the heart of the program, you could say. And Isfahan, that's more of a broader nuclear technology center, research, development, that kind of thing. So hitting these specific places wasn't just symbolic. It was aimed at crippling key parts of Iran's nuclear capability. The choice really underlines how serious the U.S. action was.
And President Trump's stated goal, I remember the language he used was incredibly direct, almost shocking.
It really was. He called the strikes very successful. But the aim, he stated, was to completely and totally obliterate these facilities. That's extraordinarily strong language. It suggests something beyond just degrading their capability, maybe. And he added that clear warning. More action would follow if Iran didn't agree to peace and, stop its escalations. It wasn't just military. It felt like drawing a very firm red line, a very aggressive posture.
Wow. Okay, so how did Iran respond to that? A direct attack on their soil, on critical infrastructure. The reaction must have been immediate.
Oh, it was absolutely immediate and just as unequivocal as you'd expect. Their foreign minister instantly condemned it, called it a grave violation of international law, pointed straight at the UN Charter, framed it purely as aggression. And Tehran declared very quickly it reserves all options in response, which, well, turned out to be far from just words. This wasn't just diplomatic noise. It was a direct challenge thrown back, setting the stage for what came next, really.
So that condemnation was just the start, right? Because Iran didn't just talk, they acted immediately, and it was fiery. Tell us about that response.
Yeah, it was a very significant response. Very quickly after the U.S. strikes, Iran launched multiple missile volleys directly at Israel. This was large-scale, direct retaliation, a rapid escalation of the kinetic part of the conflict. They specifically targeted cities like Tel Aviv, Beersheba, Haifa, major population centers. Reports mention something like 20 to 27 missiles fired off in quick succession, a coordinated barrage. Analysts called it a rare escalation. Not just the number, but the sheer boldness of hitting major Israeli cities so directly and concentratedly. It really showed a shift, perhaps, in Iran's willingness or capability to project force right at Israel.
20 to 27 missiles hitting major cities. Even with Israel's defenses, that sounds like it must have caused serious problems. What was the impact? Casualties? Damage?
Reports definitely indicated injuries and significant disruption in those areas. Israel's defenses, like Iron Dome, certainly intercepted a lot, but some inevitably got through. There was one particularly grim incident. An Iranian Sejil missile hit the Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba. That caused civilian injuries, obviously, and severely disrupted the hospital. Targeting a hospital, as you can imagine, drew immediate international outcry. Looking at the broader toll, Israel estimated that its own prior strikes had killed at least 5 Revolutionary Guards, maybe some high-level military or nuclear figures too. But overall, across the various clashes, Iranian deaths are now reportedly over 430, while Israeli fatalities are around 24. Those numbers show a stark asymmetry, hinting at, different strike types and defensive success rates.
Okay, so this U.S. action didn't just come out of nowhere then. It sounds like Israel was already quite active before June 21st. This whole thing has layers.
Absolutely. The U.S. strikes were a huge turning point, yes, but they didn't happen in isolation. Israel had been conducting its own pretty deep operations starting around June 13th. That's before the U.S. intervention. And these weren't just small attacks. We're talking coordinated airstrikes, even covert Mossad drone sabotage inside Iran, hitting critical infrastructure. It shows Israel's ongoing proactive approach to what they see as a major threat.
And what kind of targets was Israel hitting back then? Was it also nuclear sites or something broader? And what was the effect of those earlier, maybe quieter actions?
Israel's targets were actually quite varied. Aimed at crippling Iran's strategic abilities more broadly, not just nuclear, they hit missile launchers key for Iran's offensive power and also radar systems, vital for their air defense. Plus, various nuclear and other military infrastructure targets. These earlier operations also caused casualties, notably Saeed Azadi. He was a senior commander in the Quds Force, the Revolutionary Guard's elite external operations unit. His death was linked directly to Israeli cross-border efforts, showing they were targeting key figures. All this context, it's crucial. It shows this triangle, Israel, Iran, U.S., has this deep history of engagement, of actions and reactions that led up to the latest U.S. move. It adds a lot of depth to understanding why things are so tense and complex right now.
Right, so with the U.S. now directly involved and the sheer scale of these attacks, the rest of the world couldn't just ignore this. How did other countries react?
Well, the international reaction, especially to the U.S. airstrikes, has been largely condemnatory. Major players like China, Russia, and also the United Nations, they strongly denounced the U.S. actions. They pointed to violations of international law, the UN Charter. The UN Secretary General specifically made an urgent call for de-escalation, highlighting just how worried everyone is about this spinning further out of control. This condemnation, even if sometimes symbolic, it adds diplomatic pressure. And Iran, diplomatically, they've been very active. They immediately pushed for an emergency UN Security Council meeting, trying to rally international pressure against the U.S. Their foreign minister has also been lining up high-level meetings, like with President Putin. It's a clear sign they're trying to bolster international support and, frankly, manage the fallout. Trying to isolate the U.S., perhaps?
And what about diplomacy between the U.S. and Iran, or any broader efforts to calm things down? Sounds like any hope for talks must have taken a serious hit.
Oh, absolutely. Any planned U.S.-Iran talks, which, let's be honest, were already looking pretty fragile, seem to have stalled completely now. Gone dormant, really. Global diplomatic channels are obviously strained. It makes finding an off-ramp much, much harder. But here's something interesting, maybe even surprising. Analysts are suggesting that some of Iran's key proxy groups, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, they seem to be distancing themselves a bit from the immediate front line.
Wait, really? That is surprising. We often think of them as direct extensions of Iran. Why would they pull back now? What could that mean?
It's a fascinating point, isn't it? And it could imply a few things. One thought is it's strategic self-preservation. If the U.S. is hitting Iran directly, the risk for these groups becoming targets themselves goes way up. So stepping back might be a way to avoid drawing direct U.S. or Israeli fire, save their strength. Could also hint at maybe a subtle disagreement with Iran's immediate tactics, or just a cold calculation that direct U.S. involvement changes the whole game, requiring them to be more cautious. It definitely shows that this network of alliances isn't maybe quite as simple or unified as it sometimes looks from the outside.
Okay, so with this much more dangerous situation, what does it all mean for what happens next? What should we be watching for?
Yeah, the immediate future is definitely uncertain, but there are probably 3 key things to keep an eye on watch points, if you like. First, potential further U.S. strikes. President Trump explicitly said more targets are on the table if Iran doesn't back down. So more U.S. military action is a real possibility, maybe triggered by Iranian actions or lack thereof. Second, Iran's response options. They said all options are reserved. That could mean anything from, say, sophisticated cyber attacks to more proxy actions elsewhere in the region, or of course more missile or drone attacks, maybe different kinds. Their first response was quick and forceful, so we should probably expect them to keep trying to show resolve, maybe in ways we don't anticipate. And third, the state of diplomacy, or the lack of it. Those U.S.-Iran talks are dead in the water for now. Global channels are strained. The big question is, will things break down even further, or can some kind of international mediation actually gain traction and stop this from becoming an even wider war? This is, and I don't think it's an exaggeration, the most significant escalation in this whole Israel-Iran-U.S. triangle we've seen to date. The consequences for the region and for global diplomacy are huge and still unfolding.
So why is it so important for you listening right now to understand all these details beyond just catching the headlines? What's the real takeaway here?
Well, it's crucial because the knock-on effects go way beyond the Middle East. We're talking about impacts on global security structures, potential major disruptions to the world economy via energy markets. You think about oil prices, gas prices, and shifts in international relations alliances. The direct U.S. role isn't just another news item. It could signal a real change in how global power works, how international law is viewed, maybe even affecting trade deals that impact economies far away, maybe even your job market eventually. Understanding these connections helps you see that bigger picture, how events that seem far off can actually ripple outwards and touch your life.
Absolutely. Things like the U.S. directly hitting nuclear sites, Iran firing off so many missiles, and yeah, that point about the proxy groups maybe taking a step back, those are the kinds of details that paint a much clearer, much more complex picture. It's about connecting those dots to really get the gravity of it all.
And, this all leads to a bigger question, something maybe to think about beyond just today's events. In this era where global tensions seem to be rising and conflicts are all tangled together, how do the actions of one country, like these U.S. strikes, actually reshape our whole idea of international law and stability? And what role do these non-state groups, the proxies, actually play? Can they escalate things or maybe counterintuitively sometimes help de-escalate? It's something worth pondering.
That is definitely a powerful thought to take away, and it really highlights why digging into these complex dynamics is so vital if you want to be truly informed in this world.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. Until next time, keep exploring.